Michael Carter adjusted the hood of his sweater as he stepped toward the entrance of Carter and Company, the flagship store of the retail empire he had spent years building. The cool afternoon air buzzed with the energy of passing shoppers, some carrying bags from his store, others admiring the polished window displays. Normally, he would have walked in as himself, the CEO, the face behind the brand. But today, he wasn't here as the owner. He was here as a test. For weeks, anonymous complaints had been piling up, disturbing claims that black customers were being profiled, ignored, or subtly guided away from high-end merchandise. It went against everything Michael had built his company on. He had spent years ensuring Carter and Company was a place where anyone, no matter their background, felt welcomed. If his employees were tarnishing that mission, he needed to see it for himself. Dressed in casual jeans, an old hoodie, and sneakers, Michael looked nothing like the powerful businessman he was. He had purposefully left behind the expensive suits and luxury watches that usually signaled his status. Instead, he wanted to experience his store the way an ordinary customer might, one who didn't carry wealth on his sleeve. As he stepped inside, a wave of familiarity washed over him, the polished wood floors gleaming under a soft chandelier light, the scent of high-end leather and cologne filling the air, the neatly arranged shelves displaying the latest luxury goods. It was the pinnacle of what he had built, yet as he scanned the store, he wondered just how differently he would be treated in disguise. He made his way toward the premium section where handcrafted leather bags were displayed under warm golden lighting. Running his fingers over the smooth material of a briefcase, he was about to check the price tag when a sharp voice interrupted him. "Excuse me, sir." Michael turned, facing a young blonde sales associate with neatly tied-back hair and an expression that teetered between suspicion and annoyance. Her uniform was pristine, her posture rigid. She wasn't greeting him with the warm smile she had just given the white couple browsing the jewelry section. "Yes?" he said evenly. Her gaze flicked over his outfit, a barely concealed smirk forming on her lips. "Those bags are extremely expensive," she said slowly, as if he hadn't already noticed. Michael tilted his head slightly, intrigued by how quickly she had judged him. "I'd like to take a look at this one," he said, gesturing to the briefcase. She sighed, shifting her weight onto one leg. "Sir, we have security cameras everywhere. If you're just looking, that's fine. But this section is reserved for serious buyers." Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. He had heard these stories before. Black customers being dismissed in high-end stores, being treated as if they didn't belong. But now, standing in his own store, being spoken to as though he were an intruder. It was a different kind of anger. "And how do you determine who a serious buyer is?" he asked. Jessica, he read her name tag now, shrugged, offering him a tight, insincere smile. "Well, let's just say experience. I can tell when someone is in the wrong place." Michael let the silence stretch between them. She had no idea who she was talking to. He reached for the briefcase again. "I'd like to purchase this." Jessica let out a small, incredulous laugh. "Oh, no offense, but that bag is nearly $4,000. Her voice carried a note of amusement, as if the very thought of him affording it was ridiculous. "Maybe start with something more, in your range." Michael inhaled slowly, controlling the urge to smile at the irony. He had founded this company. His name was on the door. And yet, here he was, being told he couldn't afford his own merchandise. A voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Carter, is that you?" Jessica's face went ghost white as another employee, a middle-aged black man in a crisp company blazer, hurried over with wide eyes. The moment stretched, thick with realization. Michael reached up and slowly pulled back his hood. "Yes," he said smoothly, his gaze fixed on Jessica. "I am Michael Carter, and we need to talk." As Michael stepped into Carter and Company, the atmosphere inside was sleek and polished, designed to exude luxury and exclusivity. Every detail, from the gleaming marble floors to the carefully curated lighting, was meant to enhance the shopping experience. But as he walked through the doors, he immediately noticed the difference in how customers were treated. Just ahead of him, a well-dressed white couple entered, and almost instantly an employee rushed to greet them with a warm, enthusiastic smile. "Welcome to Carter and Company," the associate beamed. "Can I help you find anything special today?" The couple smiled back, engaging in pleasant conversation as they were led toward the jewelry section. Michael, however, received no such greeting. No friendly welcome, no polite nod, nothing. Instead, as he casually browsed, his presence seemed to ripple unease through the staff. He could feel eyes discreetly tracking his every move, quiet whispers exchanged behind counters. He had read complaints about this exact behavior, certain customers being treated like VIPs while others were barely acknowledged. Now it was happening to him. As he moved toward the high-end briefcases, running his fingers along the smooth Italian leather, he felt the weight of someone's stare. A young employee, a clean-cut white man with slicked-back blonde hair, was watching him closely from across the room. Michael turned slightly, meeting the man's gaze head-on. The employee, his name tag read Brad, smirked and sauntered over, arms crossed over his chest. "Can I help you with something?" Brad asked, his tone flat, disinterested. Then, before Michael could answer, he added, "We don't allow loitering." Michael raised an eyebrow. Loitering? "I was actually interested in making a purchase," he said evenly. Brad chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Right. Well, this store isn't really in your price range." He gestured toward the far side of the store. "Maybe check the clearance section?" Michael exhaled slowly, keeping his expression neutral. This was exactly what he had feared. Employees making assumptions based on appearance, judging customers before they even had a chance to speak. He took a step closer, his voice calm but firm. "And what exactly makes you think this store is out of my price range?" Brad gave a half shrug, barely concealing his amusement. "Just experience, man. I can usually tell who's serious about buying and who's just—" He waved a dismissive hand. "Browsing." Michael held his gaze, his mind already working. This wasn't just about one employee being rude. This was about a deeper problem within his own company. If Brad treated him this way, how many other customers had faced the same discrimination? How many had walked out of this store humiliated and unwelcome because of the assumptions made about them? Brad, mistaking Michael's silence for intimidation, smirked again. "Look, I'm just being honest. A store like this caters to a certain clientele." Michael let that sit in the air for a moment before responding. "Is that so?" His voice remained calm, but there was something in his tone, something controlled, deliberate, that made Brad shift slightly. Just then, a new voice interrupted. "Mr. Carter?" Brad's smirk vanished instantly. A senior employee, an older black man in a tailored blazer, approached with wide eyes. The color drained from Brad's face as realization dawned. "Yes," Michael said, slowly lowering the hood of his sweater. "And it looks like we have a serious problem." Michael stepped into the upscale boutique, his presence unnoticed as he blended into the crowd of well-dressed shoppers. He had carefully chosen his attire for this undercover visit, an old hoodie, worn jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. He wasn't here to be recognized, he was here to observe. The moment he stepped inside, he noticed the contrast. A white couple had entered just moments before him, and they were immediately greeted by a smiling sales associate. "Welcome to Carter and Company. Let me know if you need any assistance," the employee chirped enthusiastically. Michael waited, expecting at least a nod of acknowledgement. Instead, he received nothing. No greeting, no eye contact, no offer of assistance. It was as if he didn't exist. He moved deeper into the store, casually browsing through the racks of high-end suits and luxury accessories. It didn't take long before he felt eyes on him. He turned slightly and caught the sneer of a young, sharp-faced employee, Brad. Michael pretended not to notice and reached for a sleek, dark navy suit, running his fingers over the expensive fabric. But before he could even admire the craftsmanship, Brad stepped in front of him, his arms crossed, blocking his way. "That's over $2,000, Brad said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Are you sure you're in the right store?" Michael suppressed a smirk, knowing exactly where this was going. He had encountered men like Brad before, entitled, arrogant, convinced they could judge a person's worth by their appearance. He decided to play along. "I don't know," Michael said smoothly. "Maybe I should buy two." Brad let out a short, mocking laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, right." He looked Michael up and down, eyes lingering on his sneakers. "I think we both know that's not happening." Michael remained unfazed. "Oh? And why's that?" he asked, his voice steady. Brad scoffed. "Look, man, this store isn't exactly in your price range. Maybe check the clearance section?" Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head. He had given Brad every chance to redeem himself, to treat him with the same respect as any other customer. But Brad had already made his assumptions. Before Michael could respond, Brad raised his hand and gestured toward the security guard. "Yeah, I think we got a guy pretending he can afford something here." The guard, a burly man in a crisp uniform, approached with a stern expression. His eyes scanned Michael like he was sizing up a threat rather than a customer. "Sir, do you have any business here?" he asked, his voice firm. Michael sighed internally. He had hoped things wouldn't escalate this far, but now he had seen enough. It was time to drop the act. Straightening his posture, Michael allowed his true presence to take over. His casual, easygoing demeanor shifted into something commanding, something unmistakably powerful. "Business?" he repeated, his voice calm yet laced with authority. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "You could say that." The security guard hesitated, suddenly unsure. There was something in Michael's tone, in the way he carried himself, that didn't match the assumptions they had made about him. Brad, however, wasn't as perceptive. "Look, man, just leave before we have to escort you out," he said dismissively. Michael smirked, shaking his head. "No," he said firmly, locking eyes with Brad. "I think you're the one who's about to be escorted out." With that, he tapped the screen of his phone and made the call. The energy in the room shifted. Other employees and customers were starting to notice the tension, whispering amongst themselves. Brad's smug expression flickered with doubt, but he still held his ground. "Who the hell are you calling?" Brad scoffed. Michael glanced at him, unimpressed. "I'm calling the district manager," he said casually. "But don't worry, you'll find out exactly who I am in about 60 seconds. Brad snorted. "Like I care." Then the phone on the counter rang. A nearby cashier hesitantly picked it up, her face quickly draining of color as she listened to the voice on the other end. With wide eyes, she turned to Brad. "It's for you," she whispered, handing him the phone. Brad rolled his eyes and snatched it up. "Yeah?" A sharp voice responded from the other end, loud enough that the cashier, the security guard, and even nearby customers could hear. "Brad, that man you just insulted? He's the CEO of this company, and you just made the biggest mistake of your career." Brad's face turned ghostly white. Michael crossed his arms, watching as reality set in. The arrogance drained from Brad's expression, replaced by sheer panic. The security guard stepped back slightly, clearly uncomfortable now that he realized what had just happened. Michael exhaled and finally spoke. "Now, let's talk about customer service, shall we?" The store fell into a heavy silence as Michael tapped on his phone, opening the company's website. He scrolled down to the About Us section and with a measured calmness turned the screen toward Brad and the security guard. There it was, his own face staring back at them, along with his full name and title in bold letters, Michael Carter, CEO and founder of Carter and Company. Brad's smug grin dissolved in an instant. His eyes darted between the screen and Michael, as if trying to convince himself this was some kind of prank. The security guard, who had been posturing with authority just moments ago, suddenly stepped back, his confident stance crumbling into unease. "Well, wait, you're the CEO?" Brad stammered, his voice no longer carrying the arrogant certainty it had before. Michael nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "And you," he said, his voice controlled but laced with quiet power, "just turned your own boss away from his own store." The weight of those words sent an undeniable chill through the air. Other employees who had been lurking nearby, watching the situation unfold, now shifted uncomfortably, whispering amongst themselves. A few even took a few steps back, clearly realizing that this was a moment they wanted no part in. Brad swallowed hard, his throat dry. I didn't know," he muttered, his confidence shattered. Michael exhaled, shaking his head. "You didn't bother to know," he corrected. "You took one look at me and assumed I wasn't worth your time. You assumed I didn't belong here." The security guard, now realizing he had backed the wrong horse, cleared his throat and took another step back. "Sir, Michael turned his sharp gaze toward him, and just that simple movement was enough to silence him. The tension was unbearable. The very store that Michael had built, the business he had poured his blood, sweat, and tears into, had just tried to reject him, not because of his qualifications, not because of any valid reason, but purely because of an assumption. He let the silence linger, letting them stew in their own embarrassment before finally breaking it. "So tell me, Brad," he said, tilting his head, "what exactly was your policy for determining who's in the right store and who isn't?" Brad opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no words. Michael let out a dry chuckle. "That's what I thought." He turned his attention to the rest of the store, addressing not just Brad, but every employee present. "This isn't just about one bad judgment call. This is about how many customers have walked through these doors and been treated like they didn't belong. How many people were dismissed, ignored, or made to feel unwelcome based on nothing more than someone's assumptions." The employees fidgeted, their guilt written all over their faces. Some lowered their eyes, realizing that they too had played a part in creating an environment where discrimination thrived. Michael sighed. "This store bears my name. It exists because I believed in treating every customer with respect, no matter where they come from, no matter how they look. But clearly some of you have forgotten that." Brad, now visibly sweating, tried to salvage the moment. "Mr. Carter, sir, I made a mistake. Michael raised a hand, silencing him. "A mistake," he repeated. "You mean a choice, because that's what this was, a choice to judge someone unfairly, and choices have consequences." Just then, a voice interrupted from the store's entrance. "Mr. Carter, we had no idea you were here." It was the district manager, rushing in with wide eyes, already sensing the disaster unfolding. His eyes scanned the scene, the tense employees, the terrified Brad, the security guard frozen in place, and immediately understood what had happened. Michael turned toward him, his expression unwavering. "Oh, I know," he said, sliding his phone back into his pocket. "And that's exactly the problem." The weight of Michael's words pressed down on the store like a heavy storm cloud. The once busy aisles were now frozen in silence. Employees, customers, everyone had stopped to watch, their eyes flicking between Michael and Brad, between power and panic. Brad's face had gone ghostly pale, his usual smugness wiped clean. The security guard, who had moments ago stood tall and intimidating, was now stammering through an endless string of apologies, his hands fidgeting as if searching for a way to undo the damage. From the back of the store, the manager emerged, his expression laced with confusion. The murmurs from customers and employees guided his eyes to the center of the disaster, the CEO of the company standing face to face with one of his own employees, who was now trembling like a leaf in the wind. Michael turned to the manager, his posture composed, but his voice laced with authority. "Tell me," he asked, his tone cutting through the silence, "is this how we treat our customers?" The manager's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. No, sir, absolutely not," he stuttered, shaking his head with fervor, his mind already racing through the possible repercussions of what had just unfolded in his store. Michael let his gaze linger for a moment before tilting his head slightly. Then why, he continued, voice firm yet measured, did no one stop him? The question hung in the air, thick and damning. Employees shifted awkwardly, avoiding his gaze, realizing they had stood by and watched it happen without saying a word. Brad, drenched in sweat, tried desperately to salvage the moment. I just thought. Michael held up a hand, cutting him off. His tone was calm, but the edge in his voice was sharp enough to slice through Brad's weak excuses. You thought I didn't belong here, he stated, the words hitting like a gavel's final strike. Because of how I look. The truth of that statement echoed in the silent store. It was undeniable. No one could argue. No one dared. The weight of his words settled into every corner of the room, forcing everyone to confront the uncomfortable reality they had just witnessed. The tension in the store remained thick, but Michael had no intention of letting it settle. This moment wasn't just about him. It was about every customer who had ever been mistreated, every employee who had stayed silent, and every person who had been judged before they even had a chance to speak. Without hesitation, Michael pulled out his phone and sent a message to corporate. Then, with the authority of a man who built his empire from nothing, he looked up and addressed the entire staff. Everyone, listen up, he called, his voice commanding but controlled. We're having an emergency meeting, right now. Employees scrambled to gather, forming a nervous half-circle around him. Some stood stiffly, others fidgeted, afraid of what was coming. The customers, still lingering in shock, whispered among themselves but stayed put, eager to see what would happen next. Michael took a deep breath before speaking, making sure every word hit with weight. Let's be clear. Discrimination has no place in my company, none. His gaze swept over the employees, ensuring each of them felt the gravity of his words. I built Carter & Company to be a place of respect, opportunity, and fairness. What I saw today, it goes against everything this company stands for. He turned to Brad, the employee who had smugly dismissed him not long ago. The color had drained from Brad's face, his confidence reduced to sheer panic. And you, Michael's voice dropped lower, firmer. You're fired, effective immediately. Brad's eyes widened. His mouth opened and closed, scrambling for an argument. Sir, please, it was just a misunderstanding. Michael let out a humorless chuckle. No, he said, shaking his head. The only misunderstanding was you assuming I didn't deserve respect. That assumption cost you your job. Brad stammered, looking around for sympathy, but none came. Even the employees who had laughed with him earlier refused to meet his eyes now. Michael then turned his attention to the security guard. And you? He crossed his arms. You didn't just stand by, you participated in it. You're suspended pending an internal investigation. The guard swallowed hard, nodding stiffly, knowing better than to argue. Finally, Michael turned to the store manager, who was already standing at attention like a soldier awaiting orders. And you, Michael said, his tone a warning. Either you fix this culture or you're next. The manager nodded so vigorously it looked painful. Yes, sir. Immediate changes, sir. Michael let the silence linger, making sure his words had fully sunk in. Then, without another glance at Brad, he turned and walked toward the front of the store. The lesson had been served, and this was only the beginning. A week had passed since the confrontation, and Michael Carter had been watching closely from behind the scenes. He had sent auditors, held emergency training sessions, and made sure every employee understood the new expectations. Now it was time to see if those changes had taken root. This time, when Michael entered the store, he wasn't in casual clothes. He wore a sleek, tailored suit, the kind that exuded power and confidence. But unlike before, the moment he stepped through the doors, he wasn't ignored. A young employee, fresh-faced and eager, approached him with a genuine smile. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Carter & Company. How can I assist you today? Michael smirked slightly, nodding in approval. That's more like it. As he walked through the store, he observed every detail. The staff was more attentive, helping customers without bias, engaging with shoppers of all backgrounds, and ensuring that every visitor was treated with the same level of respect. The air of silent judgment that had once lingered in the store was gone, replaced with a professional, welcoming atmosphere. He noted the signs near the register announcing Carter and Company's new training policies, emphasizing diversity, inclusion, and respect. It was clear the employees had taken the changes seriously. Michael didn't need to say much. He had already made his point. Before leaving, he paused at the entrance and glanced back at the bright shining logo above the doors, Carter and Company. It stood as a reminder, not just to the employees, but to anyone who walked through those doors, that this was a business built on integrity, not assumptions. With one final glance, he stepped outside, his mission accomplished. Some lessons were learned the hard way,